Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Beyond the Bushel webinar hosted by BASF. Thanks for joining us here today. I'm Sean Haney, host of today's webinar, founder of realagriculture.com and host of Real Ag Radio on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Like I said, I'll be moderating today's discussion. So what we're going to do here today is we're going to be hearing from a panel of BASF employees who'll be sharing their expertise on how to maximize InVigor hybrid canola performance. InVigor hybrid canola gives you the tools to help you have a successful season. That's what everybody's goal is. And that includes patented pod shatter reduction technology, 2 generations of club root resistance, and much more. It wasn't too long ago, thinking of pod shatter reduction technology, where we had, I think it was like 5-6 years ago, we did this webinar. We talked about the potential for straight cutting canola. Boy, we've come a long way in that. What we're going to be discussing today is all the different ways you can maximize the potential of your InVigor through choosing multiple InVigor hybrids, proactive pest management, and the trusted dependability of Liberty 150 herbicide. So let's get to the panelists and who you're going to be hearing from here this morning. First up, it's Rob McDonald. He'll be talking about all the different things that go behind the scenes to help growers make every seed of InVigor count. BASF's been doing a lot of work in the area of research on the agronomic side, seeding depth, seeding population, things like that. Rob's been a huge part of that. Welcome, Rob, and I guess start off, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Sean. Good morning. I head our Agronomic Excellence Group. Our focus, really, we have 2 focuses in our team. We conduct final phase testing of InVigor hybrids right across Western Canada, just to ensure when we bring a new hybrid to the market that we've tested it under real world conditions. And that's really what our focus in our team's activities is, really testing using commercial equipment, Seed Hawk, John Deere 1870s, 1590, even we dabble with singulation with corn planters, all with the goal of bringing the best InVigor hybrids to the market, adapted to Western Canadian conditions. That's the first focus. Second focus, you mentioned already, is agronomic research. So we're engaged in agronomic research, really with the goal of developing best practices for our customers to get the best performance out of our genetics that we're supplying to them.
Great stuff. We're going to get to, you and I are going to have a quick Q&A here in a little bit. Also want to introduce you to Brent Galbraith. He's going to be discussing the homegrown difference Liberty 150 herbicide brings to your fields, plus some good news on the upcoming season when it comes to supply. So we're going to get to that in a second. I'm sure that's a hot button topic on the minds of a lot of the audience here. Welcome, Brent. Thanks for joining us. Tell us some of your background and what you're up to.
Good morning, Sean. Yeah, I appreciate it. So yeah, I've been with BASF now for about 10 years or so. Started off as a sales rep in the Alberta region. I've been in marketing now for about 5 years or so, and presently focused on our canola herbicide portfolio. So present management of Liberty 150, Centurion, Facet L, and Heat LQ, and really focused on trying to get the most out of each one of those products, and leading the innovation of Liberty and Centurion as well.
Great stuff. Okay, we're going to get to, and like I said, the news side of this equation too here in a little bit. Next, Tracy Blenkin and Allison Bishop. Together, they're going to be talking risk management strategies, the benefits of multiple InVigor hybrids, and more ways to set your season up for success. Tracy, first of all, we'll start with you. Welcome, and give us some of your background.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Hi, everybody. So I've been with the tech service team now for 2 seasons, working in East Sask, and prior to that, I worked with the InVigor breeding team as a breeding agronomist. I started with them in 2012. I worked retail in southern Saskatchewan before joining the breeding team. I grew up on a cattle farm east of Regina, where I recently moved back with my husband and 2 children.
Great. Allison, welcome, and let's hear a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm also a technical service specialist, same as Tracy. I have been around working in multiple areas. I just recently moved back to my hometown of Hopewell, Saskatchewan, and that's the area that I have been covering in central Saskatchewan. So in that technical service role, we are managing those large scale trials and working with the growers with our CP products and with that InVigor line as well.
Great. Okay, so everybody, you can see that we'll be covering a lot of ground here today, and I'm really looking forward to it as the 2023 season very, very fast approaches. We're at that time of the year where we got kind of that countdown, that ticker on the wall, when every day it's getting a little bit closer. Even though it's kind of cold on the prairies and there's some snow on the ground, spring is not too far away. So let's get into it. We've saved also some time here today at the end of this webinar, which is one of my favorite parts of us doing this here over the past number of years, is the Q&A. So it's your opportunity to submit a question to our group of panelists. I guess I can encourage you to do this. Please say your name. I don't need a full name, just your name and where you're based to kind of provide a geographical reference for our panelists. So I really appreciate you participating. Make it interactive, and you can put that in the question box that you see on your screen. We'll get to as many of those questions as we possibly can. Also, for those of you who are certified crop advisors, you'll receive continuing education credits for attending this webinar. And I also want to point out extra resources for everybody. If you have any questions regarding canola agronomy, BASF and Real Agriculture put on a great on-demand video series throughout the season. I think we're on like season 8 or 9 of doing this, 30 episodes through the growing season, and you can go to canolaschool.com to find those. Okay, let's get to it. Let's bring in Rob. Rob, now you kind of talked a little bit about the Agronomic Excellence Team and what you're doing. Is there more background you want to provide there in terms of what the team is up to outside of what you did in your introduction?
I guess I just expand on it a little bit. We've got research agronomists right across Western Canada, actually 2 agronomists in Alberta, 3 in Saskatchewan, and another 2 in Manitoba. So we really have a pretty comprehensive footprint across Western Canada. It's a really unique trial program where we actually scale up our replicated trials and use, as I mentioned, basically cut down commercial equipment. So drills that are no different than they're operating across Western Canada right now. So we like to think that our results are really translatable to the experience the farmer will have. That's really the goal of the program. You might see us dragging our rotary combines on flat decks across Western Canada in the fall. They don't look much different than a regular rotary combine, except they've been highly modified, and we can literally weigh exact number of grams per plot out in the field. So it's really unique program, and very excited to be part of it.
So is this the same group and team that developed InVigor? Is that the same group?
Yeah, it's one and the same. So that was one of our first major projects, was really targeting a plant population for canola, moving from seeding by the pound to seeding by the seed. And I think it's been a great advancement and improved the consistency and performance of hybrid canola across Western Canada. It's been a great ride.
Yeah, very cool stuff. Okay, and pushing, I think, the way people think, which I think is also important, and stretching some of the ways that we have always traditionally done things, as you mentioned. So what do you think is one of the key benefits of this research, and what message do you want to hit home to growers based on this research?
What we're really trying to do is drive consistency in performance. The best agronomic practice, it just can't make it rain. It can't stop it when the heat bakes the ground at 38 degrees Celsius. But what we can do is try to set our crop up for the best possibility for success. That's really what it's all about. And you know what? There's no silver bullets here. Growers are already doing a great job cultivating their crop. We're looking for small incremental gains in performance and increases in the consistency of performance. Those are really the goals. I think we try to be realistic in terms of what we try to achieve, but that's, I'm sure lots of you heard talks on the benefits of just eking out a couple percent. You know, on a big commercial operation this year, a couple percent increase in yield can make a massive difference in your overall profitability.
Yeah, especially where that canola future is now.
That doesn't hurt either.
Right, when we're talking 1, 2, 3, 4 bushels, that's a big difference than it was, say, 5 years ago for sure. So this is serious business. Okay, so you mentioned planting populations. Let's talk about seeding depth. Based on your research, what your group's been looking at, is there a magic seeding depth at this point when it comes to canola, and how is that different than maybe the way that, or some of the ideas we've had in the past?
Yeah, you know, we started doing work into seeding depth around the same time, actually, as we were working on InVigor, because the two can't be separated. So if we want to target 5 to 7 plants, well, how many seeds do we need to put in the ground to get 5 to 7 plants? And what can we do to improve the consistency of emergence of that crop? And when we first started doing this work, really the base recommendation for seeding for canola was really seeding as shallow as possible. And certainly we've gone through a number of years right now where I don't know what a normal spring looks like anymore. It's just so erratic. And we went through a number of seasons, especially if we go back, say, 3, 4 years ago, where we had pretty harsh conditions this spring and very inconsistent performance. So what we wanted to do was see what we could do around seeding depth that could improve the consistency of emergence, because quite frankly, shallow seeding just wasn't cutting it anymore.
Now, so what depth are you recommending? You know, and of course, soil types are different. And like you said, moisture conditions are different. You know, being in Lethbridge is different than being in the Red River Valley. But what depth?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So just talk about what depth are we striving for then in general?
Well, I think what our research has shown that is there isn't really an advantage under majority conditions to being as shallow as possible. So we're moving the canola seed down deeper into the profile. Now, canola seeds changed a lot over the last 15 years. You know, our seeds have certainly expressed a lot more vigor. And, you know, when I first started seeding canola, if we didn't have seed touching the surface, you didn't see some blue seeds on the surface, you were in trouble. You know, you're really worried whether it's going to come out of the ground anymore. That has changed dramatically. I actually rarely worry about my canola crops coming out of the ground because we're targeting 3/4 to 1.25 inches as our target seeding depth. I'm very comfortable at 1.25 inches into the vast majority of conditions. That's much deeper than what we used to look at. And what our research shows is, yeah, you may give up a small percentage of your emergent population versus, say, a 1/2 inch seeding depth. But the difference is you've got that measure of security of being down deeper in the profile. I'll talk a little bit about some of the disadvantages or risks with shallow seeding. Number one is you get seeds up in that 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch layer. It can get to be extremely hot and harsh and dry out very rapidly in that layer. So we want to keep seeds actually out of that layer, and we want to establish plants below that zone. Sometimes I call that zone like the 1/4 inch layer. That's the kill zone because like the organic matter's oxidized, it's dried out. We want to get below that, but we don't want to go too deep either. We know that once we get to 1.75 inches, 2 inches, we start losing significant portions of our populations and we will see reductions in yield. So the real important thing to target here is moving down a little deeper in the profile, getting below that moisture layer. And that's super important because we've seen it, we've had a few years where guys have targeted, I'm pretty happy I got to the moisture. Well, getting to the moisture is not good enough. You got to get below the moisture. I like to see a minimum of a 1/4 inch below the moisture layer to avoid dry down, because we've had a couple seasons where getting to the moisture and watching that moisture chase away as the crop's trying to establish, and that's just a massive risk. So that's why we want to go a little deeper. And and the other thing that's very, very important, you know, I can go on and on about this, but is controlling your depth. Super important to control your depth. Keep it in that range, because as I mentioned, there's risks for the seeds up in the surface layer, and there's risks for seeds below our target. because both ways. So got to keep it in the layer there. So maintain your equipment, level your drill. Don't go too fast, especially with a shank type implement that's going to be throwing a lot of seed. All these things really help contribute to consistent, uniform emergence. That's our goal, is getting that crop out even, and that sets us up for success for the rest of the season.
So you mentioned like a couple things there. Don't strand the seed. I think that's a very, very good point. But what I'm hearing, I'm trying to sort out the move going deeper. And what I'm sort of detecting from this is that you mentioned the equipment. I think this is where this plays a role. We're more confident in the preciseness of some of the equipment we're using now to put that seed in the ground, as opposed to, you know, what we were doing 10, 15 years ago. And so before it was like seed as shallow as possible, because there's going to be some at a quarter and there's going to be some at 1 3/4. And so, you know, it'll average out. Whereas now we're not doing that. We're taking, and I hate to use this reference all the time, we're taking a little bit more of a corn mentality on placing that seed exactly where we want it. And I think that's kind of, is that one of the factors that's changed here?
Absolutely. You know, the technology that we're using to put our crops in the ground has been evolving rapidly over the last 15, 20 years. You know, we're talking about recommendations of this. I'm not talking to guys that are seeding with a Velmar or, using a Disker. You know, your grandpa wants his Disker back, by the way. The bottom line is we've got a lot of advancement in technology, and we need to make use of it. And the ability to control the depth and get it into a safe zone, it's just critically important. But again, it just lends itself to getting more consistent establishment, even emergence, and then, getting away from these stagey crops. When do I spray my fungicide? It's just started to flower and here, we've got these wide ranges, consistent, uniform establishment. That's our goal. And we don't need, the other thing that invigorates us, we don't need 10 plants per square foot. You don't need to get every seed out of the ground. We want to get the majority of our seeds out of the ground at the same time and keep them healthy all season. That's the goal.
I was just going to ask you the crossing here of, depth and rate, and how those two things very much intersect and work together to, ideally, provided Mother Nature cooperates, launch that crop out of the ground as evenly as possible, because that's the critical part. It's not just that
it is
merge. It comes out of the ground as at the same time. That's the kind of preciseness we're talking about.
Exactly. We want to get that pop up out of the ground same time. Is there an intersect between seed rate and emergence? You betcha. Seed depth and emergence. Do we lose a few plants as we go deeper? Yes, we do. But it's not it's certainly worth, in my view, it's worth the risk of stranding those seeds, because nobody wants to see bare pat. Like, no plants is unproductive land. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, great points. I really appreciate it. Rob, you're going to be around for the Q&A portion. I'm sure there's going to be some agronomic questions thrown your way. So, hey, thank you so much. That's very, very interesting stuff, and the transition here and some of the work that you and your team have been doing. So thank you.
Thanks, Sean.
Okay, let's move on to Brent. And we're going to cover some things here with Liberty. So Brent, with risk management and weed control, can you talk a little bit about, from your perspective, what separates Liberty from some of the generics? Because there is generic options out there. So I know you've been doing some research, comparing and contrasting. I would expect you would be doing that. Talk about some of the results that you found.
Absolutely, yes. When we're talking about trying to maximize the yield of your canola, as well as also mitigating some of the risks associated with what can come up in a year, effective weed control is obviously a very important part of that equation. So with Liberty itself, we actually do see quite a substantial, or a few different advantages associated with it compared to some of the competitors that are on the marketplace at the moment. Today I was going to focus on the weed control as well as performance consistency that this product provides versus some of those competitors. So what we see on the screen here is actually a roll-up of that we've collected from our 5 research farms across Western Canada, 2 in Alberta, 2 in Saskatchewan, 1 in Manitoba, over the past 3 years. Why that's important to think about here is that as we have the opportunity to actually test Liberty 150 versus generic competitors in these different geographies over those 3 years, it does really provide you a really effective data set in that we can actually look at how it's going to perform in different environmental conditions, geographical challenges, as well as different weed pressures as well. Big thing that we do see here when we actually have this rolled up data set, as you see on the screen here, is that Liberty, compared to the 2 leading competitors that we have in Western Canada at the moment, do find that it does actually provide that industry leading performance, as well as improvements in the consistency of how it works as well. So it's one of those things, if we were to actually, oh, there we go. If we actually are to look at this data then a little bit differently here, so looking at this from a consistency perspective, so this is the exact same data set. Everything that you actually see on your screen at the moment there, every dot is a representation of a % control on a specific weed in that year on the different BASF farms. So big thing I can really point to here is that if you notice within each one of those products, there's those 3 dots at the bottom where no product really performed very well. That was a bit of background on that one. That was actually kochia in 2021. So hardened off weeds from a severe drought situation, something that maybe we can set aside given that that was just hopefully a very extreme event of what we've seen in Western Canada recently. When we start looking at those other data sets then and seeing where the dots start to cluster a little bit closer to the top of that graph, this is where we can then actually start to look at the individual results from each product of what it provided over those different conditions and start to recognize that within Liberty 150 itself, we actually had a much tighter data set compared to what our competitors were willing to provide, which really speaks to the consistency of the performance within these different conditions. Realizing no one actually wants to purchase a product that's only going to work half the time, we feel that this is actually a very large advantage of what we can provide our customers, realizing that it will work consistently in these different environmental conditions. And if there are situations where it doesn't work up to expectations, this is where we're really trying to differentiate ourselves from our competitors by providing that next level of service and support with our performance support guarantee. If you have weed escapes within your fields, this is where we want to go that extra mile, clean up those fields, provide you that cleaner field, higher yields at the end of the day, and hopefully continue to earn your business going forward.
Okay, I like that, earn your business going forward. A part of that is supply.
Absolutely.
You got it. Because I know it's going to come up in the Q&A, so I might as well just head it off. So there's probably lots of people wondering this question. What's the update on supply for 23?
Yeah, I appreciate this is probably very front of mind, given some of the challenges we had this past year with our supply of Liberty 150. I'm excited and happy to announce to everyone that we are well on our way of actually completing our production plan to support the 2023 season, actually produced and have more product in the channel than we ever have at this point in time. So something that after some of the challenges we had last year with our supply, of course, heard a lot of feedback from our customers, and we took that to heart to make sure that we were not going to do this again. And as a result of that, the plant in Regina, Saskatchewan, that does produce all of our Liberty 150 has been more or less working straight through since August. So one of those things I will say, very excited by the fact that we are well ahead of where we've ever been at this point in time. I know it provided a lot of confidence internally. Externally, I hope customers do trust in us in the sense that we will have the product available when we need it. And the intention right now is that all Liberty 150 will be produced by the end of the 2nd week in May. Putting that in perspective, typically we would be producing into that 2nd, 3rd week of June.
So really moving up production compared to last year and prior years then?
Absolutely.
Okay, interesting. Okay, cool. Well, I appreciate you tackling that one because I know there's probably lots of retails and farmers that are on this webinar wondering about that. So Brent, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. You're going to be here for the Q&A. So if people have questions about Liberty, they can field them in the Q&A section. I encourage everybody, your name, location would be very helpful to Brent and the other panelists as they tackle the questions. So let's move on to Allison and Tracy. Tracy, okay, shifting gears a little bit, with growers setting up for the upcoming season and the importance of seeding practices, building off what Rob talked about, and we think about weed control as we've been discussing, how else can growers, in your mind, maximize the potential of their InVigor purchase?
Yeah, Sean, so setting up canola for success is really important, and managing volunteer canola is key. So volunteers make it more difficult to achieve that targeted plant population, lower the yield of the crop, and increase incidence of disease. So getting ahead of volunteers with a pre-seed product like Certitude is really important, and I'm going to be talking about Certitude in a little bit, but just wanted to mention that. And then another is getting that optimum plant population of 5 to 7 plants per square foot using our InVigor rate. And then Rob did a really great job of explaining how important it is to have that optimum seeding depth. And then choosing multiple InVigor hybrids on your farm is really important as well. So we have 13 different hybrid options in our lineup with 3 new ones for this upcoming season. We have our mid to late maturing hybrid L350. So it has great standability. It has the capability of being a very high yielder. And then we also have our InVigor Choice hybrid LR354PC. So this hybrid offers growers a high yield potential, great standability, as well as added flexibility of utilizing both the Liberty Link technology system and TrueFlex canola with Roundup Ready technology. And then last, our new health hybrid. So this is L359HPC. This hybrid offers enhanced oil profile to meet the health and functionality requirements of today's consumers. All 3 of these hybrids come with the first generation club root resistance and our pod shatter reduction technology. And then last, we want to manage canola's disease preventatively. So making sure we're aware of diseases in fields by scouting, identifying, and monitoring infections.
Okay, so I'm thinking, like, I think for canola and wheat in the past, like with wheat, it was like, the whole prairies were seeded to berry, it kind of felt like. Or with canola, it was like, 54-40, just, seed the farm. You've talked about some of the different portfolio options here. How do growers leverage the broadness of the portfolio to really, really take advantage of all the options that are available to them?
Yes, that's right, Sean. So you don't just have to pick one hybrid. As I said, we have 13 to choose from. Multiple hybrids can provide your fields with multiple benefits. So this can be spreading out harvest with different maturities. So planting an early maturing hybrid as well as a mid to late. This will really ease some stress at harvest. And then rotating multiple hybrids will also help reduce the risk of disease pressure. And it will also help manage the risk of environmental factors such as high wind or hail at harvest with increased flexibility. Seeding multiple hybrids will help you gain experience and confidence with a new to the market hybrid, but still continuing to seed your most trusted. So growers can take advantage of that genetic variability to cover different needs on their farm. So I'm talking about the pod shatter reduction technology, our first and second generation club root resistant profiles, the herbicide tolerance system that we have to offer, and our reliable standability.
Okay, Allison, we have talked about a lot of different stuff here. So we're getting the crop at where we're the right rate, right depth, we're getting out of the ground, we've covered weed control. And then there's these diseases that just want to rob us of our potential yield. And like we talked about, 5 bushels or 2 bushels is a lot more money than it used to be. So let's talk about managing diseases preventively. What should we be looking out for?
Yeah, for sure, Sean. We'll get right into that. I'm going to provide some insight on our positioning with some of the key canola diseases that farmers are facing. So that will include that clubroot, blackleg, verticillium, and Sclerotinia. But the one thing that I want to remind all the growers of is managing the diseases does need to start with that integrated pest managing approach. So that needs to include scouting fields, properly identifying diseases, monitoring infection. It is a balance of agronomy and a business. So BASF does recommend that 1 in 3 year rotation. We need to make sure that we're managing susceptible weeds and volunteer canola. If possible, we can use a registered fungicide at the proper timing. And then if we have genetics available to us, we can use those as well.
Yeah, it's amazing with any disease in any crop, it's amazing how rotation is usually one of the solutions. Now, specific to clubroot, some companies have started to label for clubroot. What is BASF doing?
Yeah, so we'll talk about what we're currently doing, and then I will mention how we're moving forward in the future. So currently, all InVigor clubroot-resistant hybrids have been developed to be resistant to the most predominant clubroot pathotypes found in Western Canada at the time of their registration. We also want to remind our growers that genetics are part of an IPM strategy, and we don't want to rely on them because that's when we see those genetics break down very quickly. So currently we do have 9 first-generation resistant hybrids that growers should start with. If they do start to see a breakdown with those hybrids, that's when they can move to that 2nd-generation clubroot resistance. We have not seen a breakdown in that resistance yet. We have got a couple of calls out to some fields, but we have noticed that they're volunteers, so we haven't seen a breakdown with that yet. So getting back to your question about labeling, what are our plans? So labeling for specific pathotypes doesn't mean much right now unless growers know exactly what is in their fields. And sometimes those rare pathotypes can be hidden by what's predominant. So hopefully by this spring we'll have more information. Steven Strelkov's lab is actually working on developing a standardized uniform inoculum, which means single spore isolates. So at that point, they might have a labeling structure developed by December 2024. With that, BASF would consider labeling some of those as well.
Okay, blackleg. That's another one that should be, I don't know, sometimes I wonder if it's not, should be more top of mind or at least more in the focus. When we think about blackleg resistance, are you handling that the same way?
Yeah, so blackleg is a little bit different, and we have not got to a point where we do label these yet. So we do rely on a major and minor gene strategy for blackleg. We do think that this is the most durable strategy for our growers. I will get down to that in a bit, but first of all, it is so important that we properly identify blackleg. It is very difficult, and there is that common misconception that if you do a cross-section clipping and you see black in there, you assume that it's blackleg right away. You really want to look for that pie shape in the cross section, and then at lesions you want to look for that brill-like pycnidia. So blackleg is also saprophytic, which means that it's quite often a secondary disease as well. The best way that we're going to have to find out if it's blackleg or not is through PCR testing. It is a lot more accurate than trying to visually identify. And then I will get on to your question about the resistance. So as I said, BASF does use a minor and major disease resistant breeding strategy. So if we look at the chart below, if we're using major gene resistance, we need to match that up perfectly with the race in our field. Unfortunately, all fields contain multiple populations of blackleg races. And the hybrids that contain both minor and major genes will offer a robust protection against all races, not just one like a major gene. So if we look at that right-hand side of that chart, that's where we're showing those minor genes really helping out. So they're going to help protect the longevity and durability of major genes by reducing overall selection pressure and providing robust and therefore sustainable resistance. So that's where with major and minor gene labeling, when we get the chance to label minor genes, BASF would be very excited about taking that into consideration.
Now, a disease that feels like probably, and some of the real agronomy honks here are going to be like they're onto this one, but for the rest of us, verticillium is a bit of a rookie on the block. And in one of the prior slides there, when you talk about blackleg, you showed identifying verticillium versus blackleg. There is differences, but it seems like there's some opportunity to be kind of confusing the two and misdiagnosing. So talk about that and how we differentiate the two.
Yeah, for all these diseases, it's going to be really hard to identify visually, and I do think that it's still best to go with that PCR testing. Okay. With verticillium specifically, a key differentiating factor is that xylem that turns black within the stem, and so that's what we'd be seeing in that cross-section clipping. We'll also notice that those outer layers will start to shed, and we can peel those back, If you peel those back, you'll almost see small pepper flecks, which is the microsclerotia. So it is a little bit different when it comes to that outside layer than blackleg for sure. But like I said, that PCR testing is going to be your best option. I feel like I've seen a lot of diseases and I am able to misidentify as well. And this is a very new disease to Canada. So we have recently established verticillium stripe screening nurseries. It is in early stages of identifying potential sources of genetic resistance. So as a company, we're still learning that some hybrids are showing better tolerance than others. Keep in mind that does not mean resistance. This would include our InVigor L340 PC and InVigor L350 PC. So as we move forward with newer hybrids, we're definitely seeing a little bit better tolerance. Verticillium stripe management does need to provide clear and tangible value to growers, the industry, and our trade partners as well. And we do think that this can most efficiently be accomplished with that IPM plan that I was talking about earlier. So specifically with verticillium, this is very difficult, but we do need to include that rotation, limiting soil movement, as currently seed treatments and fungicides are showing limited to zero efficacy.
And so just to make sure I got this straight, is there a rating system out there for verticillium yet, or is that's still in the works?
So that's still what we're working on. So lots of companies, and like I said, we are finding hybrids that may show better tolerance than others. But that's kind of where we're at this point. We are learning more about this every single day. We're also beginners when it comes to verticillium stripe. And hopefully as we learn more about this disease, we have better recommendations.
Okay, and just not to put you on the spot too much on the verticillium, just because I think this is a new one. Okay, so just and maybe some of this will come up in the Q&A. Like with Clubroot, started in kind of that Edmonton area, and we found other geographies. In this case, this is more of a Manitoba issue. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. Started in Manitoba in about 2014, so we have been seeing it spread since then, of course, and it can last in that soil for about 10 to 15 years. So yeah, it is quite concerning to growers, and because we don't know much about it, that is where it becomes very difficult. So we do get lots of questions about whether a grower should maybe swath or straight cut with this disease, but those are all unknowns, and with different hybrids, it's always going to change. When the disease comes into your field, it's going to make a difference as well. So lots of variables with this one for sure.
Okay, cool. So that's the rookie. Now the wily veteran is Sclerotinia. Based on the updated research, proactive is still the best answer here to fight this one?
Definitely. And so this one is, yeah, quite interesting. We do still need to talk about this. I feel like if any of our growers on the call have experienced a year with glad Sclerotinia, and they've possibly seen up to that 50% yield reduction on their farm, they do know that this is a very serious disease. So we can identify this one by that fraying on the stem, and then the Sclerotinia, or the sclerotia bodies inside the stem. We currently don't have any S hybrids, which would mean Sclerotinia tolerant hybrids, on the market. So we do work with these IPM strategies to reduce the impact of Sclerotinia. We talked about those optimal seeding rates of plant populations of 5 to 7 plants per square foot. We can really create a different microclimate if we get higher than that, which makes more humidity and makes a more susceptible year for Sclerotinia. We want to avoid planting susceptible crops consecutively. We want to scout for conditions that encourage Sclerotinia, assess that disease risk and crop potential, carefully monitor the moisture, and then this one, we can also use a foliar fungicide preventatively at the right timing.
Okay. Now, disease is one thing, but just jumping back to the weeds and our prior discussion about Liberty 150, what options do growers have when it comes to even like things like tank mixes and things like that in terms of staying ahead of the weeds? Specifically, one of the worst weeds is actually volunteer canola, which is I guess maybe kind of ironic based on our discussions here. But what are some of the options?
So I'll jump in now, Sean. So that's a really great question. Really, the purpose of a pre-seed herbicide application is to get that canola off to a weed-free start, protect the yield, and manage herbicide resistance. Growers also get the control of host plants, which is really important. And by controlling volunteers, you do a better job of achieving that optimum plant population that we all keep talking about. And lastly, you can reduce the field variability from volunteers or where weeds are competing heavy with that canola.
So Tracy, on that, when we think about that flush of weeds that are coming, the longer, is it true in canola as well? Because I'm just thinking of some of the stuff I've heard from, in some of the agronomy stuff we've done with corn, like, the longer we let those weeds grow, because we're gonna let them all emerge, and we're gonna get them out, and we're gonna then we'll get them with that pass. The longer we wait, the more we're knocking ourselves off that optimum yield curve when it comes to canola. Is that true as well?
Yes, Sean, absolutely. Yield loss from weed competition can be really significant. Any weed that canola competes with when it's getting off to a start will make it harder to get that optimum plant population. So the weeds will also be taking up moisture and nutrients and access to sunlight. The larger those weeds get, the harder they will be to control at that in-crop timing as well.
Okay, great stuff. Critical weed-free period, that right? Is that what we call that?
Yes.
Yeah, there we go. See, I know some stuff, enough to be dangerous. Okay, thanks everybody's participation here in the Q&A portion. Now, this is where we continue Q&A, but we open it up to the audience. So I encourage everybody to put your question in the question box, your name and location, your local town, and in some cases we may challenge ourselves on our knowledge of Western Canadian geography. We'll see what comes up here, but and also just want to remind everybody, in case you didn't write everything down, BASF is also going to be posting a recording of this webinar on the site soon. So let's get to some of the questions. Tracy, while I'm going through the questions, did you have more to talk about there? On certitude, Tracy? Oh, she's muted, I think.
Sorry about that. So yeah, I was just going to touch on our pre-seed product Certitude. So this product, it enables growers to maximize yield potential by managing key weeds like volunteer canola at that critical time of year. So Certitude is the first group 27 herbicide used for pre-seed and canola production, and it has that really dependable efficacy. And then I also wanted to mention we also are going to be having a new product handling tool for Certitude. So we've heard feedback from growers that the little Certitude A jug has not worked when cleaning out with chem handlers. So a team at BASF has come up with a screw-on funnel that will simplify that clean out when using a chem handler. So retailers will be getting supply of this tool, and they'll be giving it out in the spring. So yeah, don't forget to get your funnel if you're picking up Certitude and have had issues in the past.
Great stuff. Okay. Let's get to some of the questions here. Question from Daniel, farms outside of Winnipeg. Are there any ways to avoid verticillium other than rotation? Other than rotation, possibly at early growth stage. And then he's got a follow-up question regarding seed treatment. So maybe, Allison, do you want to answer the first one there in terms of avoiding verticillium?
Yeah, for sure. So as I mentioned, seed treatments and foliar fungicides do have limited efficacy on verticillium from what we know right now. So I'm sure that that's what you're looking for from that early season control question. You also want to reduce that soil movement, utilize newer hybrids, and manage your weeds and volunteer canola if at all possible. So those are some of the things that you can do proactively.
Okay, the second part of Daniel's question is, what is BASF still using last year's seed treatment?
So in 2023, we are our seed treatment option, or I guess our base treatment, is going to be that Helix fibrins, and then it will have the option to add that Lumiderm or buteo start on as well. So we did definitely hear our growers' concerns on that comment.
For sure. Okay, question here for Rob from Shane from Enchant, Alberta. I know Shane. What effect on germination and emergence will soil temperature and moisture have? Is there an optimum for each that one would be able to reduce the seeding rate?
There's a lot rolled up into that question, Don. All right, so canola actually will germinate at very low temperature, as low as 2 degrees Celsius. But the downside is it takes 8 days to germinate at 2 degrees Celsius. So, seeding into near frozen soil has definite downsides in terms of potential for mortality. As far as an optimum, once we get up to that 6-7 degrees, we get our germ time down to about 2 days, which is great. You want to be able to really see that radical popping out of the seed after 36, 48 hours. That's more ideal. And then the soil hopefully will continue to warm, which overall will accelerate the establishment process. As far as reducing seeding rate, there's 4.25 million seeds in one of those bags. That's each bag of InVigor. And there's that's enough for about 10 seeds per square foot. That's a great baseline for a wide variety of conditions. So the bottom line is, you get better conditions, you get warmer soils, you get ideal moisture, you get a nice targeted seeding depth. That might give you some room to chase down the seed rate a little bit. You can tweak it, and you can tweak it one way or the other based on your conditions. It's really about your own experience on your own ground with your own residue management. I didn't talk about residue management, and just how critical that is to establishment. Managing trash is super important. So bottom line is there a relationship? Yes. Is there an ideal? I'd say no. You have to it's all about finding a balance and managing risk. Because the other thing that we have to overlay on top of that is, one thing that our research has shown definitively, if there's one advantage for yield, it's early seeding. But with early seeding, you have to manage frost, soil temperature, all these things that you mentioned in your question. But the payoff is yield. So finding the balance there, managing that risk, that's really the art.
Okay, great stuff. Question here for Brent from David. David farms in St. Benedict, Saskatchewan. What is the effect of weed pressure when canola comes out of the ground? How important is it to spray early? Maybe you can cover 1 pass versus 2 passes there too, Brent.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I think Sean, you and Tracy actually answered this one, or touched on this quite well actually a few minutes ago when we were talking about that critical weed-free period. Thinking of that one, I know the Canola Council of Canada has actually done very extensive testing on the impact of early weed control on yield within canola, obviously. And the big thing that they actually found was that if you were to actually get that weed control up to about that 2-leaf stage or so is where you'll actually find it'll have the biggest impact on your yield. After that, it still does have some impact on yield, but it's more for aesthetic reasons and preventing the seed set of the weeds that are present. One more thing I'll actually just add with it too is when we look at like kochia as an example, or weed like that, they do estimate about 80% of all kochia will actually be up before you have the opportunity to put the canola seed in the ground. So putting in the plug for Certitude, which is one of the brands I launched a few years ago, actually outstanding opportunity to really get ahead of it. First group 27 herbicide, tank mixed with glyphosate, follow up with Liberty and Crop. You have 4 effective modes of action, actually working on that kochia plant early on in the season to help you maximize that yield potential.
Great.
Second part of that on 2 pass, sorry, just gonna touch on that one too real quick.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say with that one, of course, when we're thinking of that one, it is more focused on, as I said, that aesthetic reason, trying to make sure you achieve the cleaner fields throughout the entire season, and obviously preventing that seed set as well.
Yeah, I was just going to add in, Sean, that our research has shown that we see such a strong correlation between early season seedling vigor and final yield. It comes out so strong every year. So protecting those seedlings, managing flea beetles. Well, let's not talk about flea beetles, but the managing flea beetles, managing weed pressure, keeping those seedlings strong early on is such, it delivers yield at the end of the season. We see that time and time again in our data.
Well, we'll blame it on Rob. He brought it up, flea beetles. We'll go to that next. It's all Rob's fault. Tracy, question here from Bryce. Bryce is in Leroy, Saskatchewan. Have you seen early seeded canola more impacted by flea beetles? And this is an interesting discussion because I've been hearing more and more from growers that they may be pushing back their canola seeding date, trying to get out of that little bit early adversity area where they maybe get hit by that touch of frost that really gives those flea beetles more of that, I guess, a bigger window to punish the crop. So what's some of your work shown here, Tracy? What do you think? Oh.
So, sorry about that. So it really depends on environmental factors that spring. If we have warm early spring conditions with plants popping out of the ground quite quickly and the canola taking off, the flea beetles oftentimes can't keep up to the canola, and there are for sure less issues with flea beetles. That hasn't been the case for quite a few years. So it is when we have the cool spring conditions, what has been most common, that the flea beetles, they can take over and do some really serious damage quite quickly. So it's really different every year. So
yeah, it's such a huge issue for growers. Like it's a major frustration. We talked about some of the diseases and the frustrations. Flea beetles are the one that I hear a lot when we do our farmer rapid fire on Thursdays. Early in the season, we're talking to farmers that the flea beetles come up. It's a big frustration. So another question here from Jim. He's in Tees, Alberta. And Allison, he's asking about flea beetles as well, and the general critical window for emergence to keep ahead of the flea beetle populations. Like, at what point are we sort of out of the danger zone?
Yeah, I feel like my Alberta farmers have definitely had a tough go with some flea beetles in the past couple of years. So we do want to remember that cotyledon stage is extremely important with flea beetles. Based on your price of canola, that economic threshold can always change, but we do need to follow that 25% defoliation rule with the cotyledons. That is when you want to get in there and spray, as that damage, those populations can increase extremely rapidly if they are actively feeding. That's when it's going to cause the most damage to your farm. Once we get into that two-leaf stage, we can typically outgrow it. I know that we've had some relentless flea beetles in the past few years. And some growers also have some higher plant counts, so they can afford to lose more. So it's going to be based on your own farm as well, but we still stick with that 25% defoliation at cotyledon rule.
Awesome. Question here from Ron. He farms in East Central Saskatchewan. And Rob, I'll throw it to you, and if anybody else wants to pitch in, step in here too. But so we talked about population and we talked about depth. Any advantage to variable rate seeding? And maybe if you've done some work in terms of variable rate fertilizer too.
It's a good question, and something that I guess be fair to say we're still chasing. And we've been looking at variable rate seeding for multiple years now, on even on a field scale. Spend a lot of time trying to thresh out, is there an ideal population? How does an ideal population vary between more productive and less productive portions of the field? And I'd love to say I've got a great recommendation for you. Despite multiple years of research, our data is still inconclusive in this area. We generally see, I'll give you some general comments here. We generally see that in more stressful parts of the field, they can actually benefit from a slightly lower population. And it goes to logic. It goes to logic. And likewise, in more productive parts of the field, they can capitalize on more yield from a slightly higher population. But to say that definitively and say that I've got research data to support a variable rate prescription at this point in time, I don't yet. I wish I did. We're still working on it.
Okay, Rob, I got another one here for you. And the answer can't be seed peas. What if the moisture layer is deeper than 1 1/4?
1.25. Oh, wow. That's a tough one. Wow. Deeper than 1.25. You know what? I'm not a big fan of chasing moisture. If you target, I'll throw another number out there. I'll throw 2 inches out there, or even if I'll 1.9 inches, just to make you happy. If I'm targeting 1.9 inches with my drill, I'm in trouble because generally on our drills, we have about a 3/4 of an inch variance in our seating depth across the drill, front to back on the shanks, even with it all leveled and working great. And the consequence to that is we go to 2 inches as an example. Now we've got seeds at 2 3/4 of inch. And you know what? Our mortality rate goes off the chart at that point in time. So chasing moisture gets risky. Now, that's been our experience. You know, that's the best way I can answer it. Like if the moisture's at 1.25 inches, am I comfortable to set my drill at 1.5 inches? You bet. I'll do that. But boy, as you get deeper, and again, it varies by soil type, by drill, by opener, by packing system. All these things are huge factors. So, but it gets risky. And like let's be absolutely clear: as we start pushing beyond that layer, we lose more and more population. Now, having said that, this year in some of our trials, our 1.75 inch depths look quite good. We had pretty good establishment, but that was just maybe they came up a little after the flea beetles. Maybe that's why they looked a little bit better this year. I don't know. But bottom line is, it does take longer to get out of the ground, and you do lose population. It's not unlimited. These aren't peas, right? It's still canola.
Okay, Brent, I think this is for you. Joe from Manitoba wants to know, he says, why are we seeing more escapes in lamb's quarters and red root pigweed in the last 4 years? And is there any antagonism with Amigo?
So I can put to rest the idea that there being antagonism with Amigo. We've done very extensive testing, and that is a frequently used tank mix of Centurion plus Liberty. It's used on, I think, around 10 million acres a year or something of that nature. So it's not that. Looking at why you might have more escapes with lamb's quarters or something of that nature, I mean, there's obviously a lot of different environmental factors that could go into something like that. It's a little hard to answer ad hoc like this. Probably the biggest recommendation I'd make is to, one, obviously complete a very effective pre-seed herbicide application to try and keep the size of those weeds down, and would also encourage you to actually bump up the rate of your Liberty 150 if you haven't done so already. Push it up to that 1.62 liter per acre rate. And of course, if you are still finding challenges with that one, that's where I'd actually encourage you to reach out to your BASF sales representative, and I'm sure they'd be happy to help you with providing proactive recommendations on how to actually effectively manage that weed, or actually provide support after the fact if we are still finding that it escapes.
Okay, Allison, question for you from Jason in Fairview. Would like you to talk about root maggots talk about how root maggots led to blackleg.
Yeah, for sure. So I've actually seen that multiple times before. Root maggots can get right in there because blackleg is saprophytic. So what that means is blackleg is really good at feeding on dead material. So then it gets in there. So we see the same thing with blackleg if we have anything like hail damage, mechanical damage. We can definitely see that blackleg, which is why oftentimes blackleg is actually a secondary disease. That's also why when we're scouting for blackleg too, we usually say that 60% seed color change timing. Lots of guys go out when they harvest, but they don't typically go out the day that they've swapped their harvested, because that's the easiest time to actually get through your field and walk through it. If you've left it for too long, those spores move along and they get into those other open wounds or that freshly cut canola very quickly. So that blackleg disease might actually look worse than it was in season. It's really hard to know with blackleg just because it is so good at feeding on that dead material.
Okay, and whoever wants to take this can grab it. Ed from Western Manitoba, have you done any testing on fungicide application for blackleg at herbicide timing? Brent or Allison?
Yeah, so I think that there is some older research that did show that there was efficacy of spraying at that 2 to 4 leaf stage. Ultimately, with the way that things lined up, you could still go in there at that earlier time if you knew that you were going to have a blackleg hybrid that was more susceptible with those major genes. You could go in there at that time. I know that in red deer, I think that we saw great efficacy with using fungicide at that timing. But in lots of scenarios, it is a later onset of that infection. So it's very particular for every different grower.
Rob, you thought 1.25 inches was chasing moisture. There's somebody that's got a question. They didn't put their name or their location, but they're wondering about 2 to 3 inches down. Is that a seed peas situation?
Yeah, 2 to 3 inches. Like I said, for a lot of my base seeding depth here, like say in southern Alberta, is 1.25 inches. That's what we set our drills at, almost regardless of condition, with one exception, and that one exception is waterlogged soils. You don't want to seed deep in a waterlogged soil, as shallow as possible in waterlogged soil. Waterlogged soils are an anaerobic, and there's no oxygen in waterlogged soil, and seed will rot. So the bottom line is that'd be the one exception. The question again, 1.25 inches. 2 to 3 inches. No, yeah. we don't see it 2 to 3 inches. That's just a no-go zone.
Yep. Okay, that's what I thought. Speaking of seeding depth, there's a question here. Is seed size a factor as well with seeding vigor, Rob?
You know what? I get that question a lot, and we've researched that quite intensely. And I can say in the case of every bag of InVigor seed, our performance at depth doesn't vary based on the seed size, whether it's an A, B, or C, or D. They're all coming out of the ground with the same vigor, and we've got literally years of research to support that in terms of getting the same plant stand regardless of seed size. One thing that's probably not that well understood actually is that depending on seed size, actually the small seed actually germinates quicker than the large seed. It simply takes longer for a larger seed to imbibe the moisture. So quite often we'll see our small seeds pop out of the ground first.
Interesting. Some counterintuitiveness there. Question for Tracy or Allison. With the unfortunate, and hopefully this changes for 2024, that's me editorializing there, but with the loss of the Lambda Psi products for 2023, what agronomic strategy would you recommend if we were using that product, those product lines as insecticides? What should we be doing? So we've lost an insecticide tool. And when we look at some of those bugs that we're trying to take care of, those insects, of course, not the beneficials, but the ones that are robbing us of the yield. Do you have any comments on agronomic strategies for the upcoming season since we don't have that tool in the toolbox anymore?
Yeah, as we pull those tools away, it definitely makes it harder, but I always want to, like I mentioned, even with the diseases, you definitely want to follow an integrated pest management approach. Even with rotations, it's extremely important when you're giving those things something to feed on versus not. I would spread out your rotation as much as possible for lots of those insects and stuff that you're trying to control.
Yeah, Tracy, I mentioned this earlier, but when it comes to diseases and issues, across all the different crops, rotation is it's always the number one thing that comes up. That's not necessarily some sort of coincidence trend that we're talking about. Crop rotation is a major tool when it comes to managing some of these diseases, right, Tracy?
Yes, absolutely. And not only diseases, but we're coming across herbicide resistance, which is really top of mind right now too, and really important to be thinking about.
Okay, perfect. Let's see, what else do I got here? Rob, a question from Dwayne from Bentley. Back to the seed size. Have you seen, oh, sorry. I know that seed size is not supposed to matter, but I have fellow farmers who swear bigger is better from their experience last year. Do you want to provide some additional thoughts to that? And do conditions make a difference in that answer?
Yeah, like I was saying, we've been researching this for many years now. We haven't seen a net difference or net contribution of seed size with our InVigor seed. You know, really the way we handle the seed, the way we condition the seed that goes in the bag, we really do everything to ensure consistent performance across seed lots and across seed size ranges. And that remains consistent. You know, in our own trials, we have our own InVigors up against competitors as well. And we see a wide range of seed sizes. And I was just looking at the data the other day from the past season, and you know, in terms of, you know, what's the metric? Yeah, well, what's the yardstick? Well, how many plants do you have established? We just see really strong plant establishment. You know, there can be other factors that can influence and interact with overall seedling vigor, whether it's diseases present, things we talked about earlier, weeds presence, flea beetle, all these things can interact on seedling vigor. So just singling out seed size, yeah, I don't buy it.
Okay.
Yeah, and I can add on to that one too, Rob, because I think that there is quite a misconception due to the fact that there was previous studies that did show a difference between large size seed and smaller size seed. So that's when they were comparing things outside of the ranges that we're selling. So we can be totally confident that within the ranges of seed that BASF is selling, that there is no difference between that A, B, C, or D size.
Okay. Question from Lacrete. This one's for Brent. When spraying Liberty, has there been research done in regards to nozzles and water volume and just the overall impact of those decisions?
So we have done pretty extensive testing into both of those items, actually. I'd say if I was to summarize the results from it, we find that coarse to medium coarse droplet size is the ideal of what you should be targeting with Liberty, as well as more water, the better. That tends to be the cheapest part of the application, and definitely would encourage you to do 10 gallons per acre or more. And we do find, obviously, the higher you go, the more effective coverage you get across the weeds and better weed control as a result of that.
There's another question, it's long, but Brent, I was wondering about the path of Liberty and kochia. Any comments on Liberty and its ability to tackle kochia?
Sorry, I don't know if I'm clear on the question.
Well, here it says the rate of Liberty keeps going up, but the control of kochia is on the decline. Is there going to be any new genetics? Is there going to be new genetics for other chemicals or maybe actives to control kochia, or changes to Liberty? Or do you have any recommendations on tank mixes for Liberty? Like,
sure.
Farmers frustrated just trying to control kochia. So there you go.
That's fair. I appreciate that. Yeah. So one thing that we've actually done very recently to help provide better management of kochia specifically was the introduction of the advanced weed control program on canola. Why I bring that one up specifically is because what our recommendation there was is to actually start your year with doing a pre-seed application of Certitude plus glyphosate, followed by an in-crop application of Liberty 150. If you have a very high population of kochia within your field, I would recommend definitely going at the higher rate, the 1.62 liter per acre rate. And within that advanced weed control program, if you were to follow that recommendation of the Certitude followed by Liberty in crop, if you have escapes of kochia after that Liberty application, that's where we would then step up and provide you support within our performance support guarantee guidelines.
We got a whole bunch of audience. We got people supplying questions in the question box. I've got questions on my cell phone, and I've now got questions in my email box. So they're coming from all directions. So, okay, my email, which wasn't one of the options presented, by the way, but whatever. Danny is in Fort Vermilion, and he wants to know, getting back to this portfolio, okay, like, you know, all the different options of hybrids. I don't know who's going to tackle this one, so somebody step up. Is BASF going to phase out shorter and mid-season canolas long term? It seems like there's less and less variety options. We love farming in the Peace River country, but need canola that can handle that shorter season and still grow a bumper crop. So Danny's got a perception there. Does anybody want to tackle that one?
Yeah, sure. I don't think that's necessarily the direction that we're going. When we go through our breeding program, we always want to select the hybrid that's going to perform the best across all of the trials. And it's actually quite interesting because up in that Peace area, we did in the past see that those shorter season hybrids performed very well. In this most recent season, we actually saw that some of the longer season hybrids performed better up there in our DST trials. So quite interesting the way that everything performs. It is a great option where we can have a 3 and a 5 maturity hybrid on each farm to spread out that management practice like Tracy had mentioned and reduce that stress. It's not our intention to reduce the amount of 3 hybrids on the marketplace, but just what we're finding available with our genetics and our plant breeding. We're just finding that the 5 hybrids might be performing better, and we always want to give our growers the best performing hybrid that we can get in that plant breeding program. So that's where we move into that direction. If we eventually find a 3 hybrid that gives us all of the quality parameters and can out yield the 5 hybrid, that would be a great option for sure. I'm sure we would move that direction very quickly for you. But what we're finding right now, the 5 hybrids, we are finding some of those that are just blowing the ceiling off that yield. So that's why we go in those directions.
Okay. Rob?
Yeah, I was just going to add, targeting early and mid hybrids remains a critical component of our or objective of our breeding program. Pretty excited. We'll be trialing a number of these new potential ones for the future in our program in the coming season. So pretty excited what's in the pipeline.
Now, Neil from White Mud Creek, Alberta, I don't know where that is. We're being stretched on geography, so, or at least my knowledge. But Neil's in White Mud Creek, and I just want to give a bit of a context before I ask the question. I've been hearing about this from corn seed companies where, doing research to individual hybrids and then providing like, this is, based on this soil type, this is the rate you should be planting at, like just different stuff like that. So Neil's question, does optimal plant population change for different hybrids? I've had several people tell me that some of the new hybrids perform better with less plants. Is there any truth to this? Rob, this sounds like a you question.
Thanks, Sean. Do different hybrids perform differently at different target plant populations? The Invigorate we find works well, and it represents a range, right? And 5 to 7 plants. I guess the only guidance I would give overall would be, some of our stronger standing hybrids will actually manage a higher population well. Where some, say, if we have a hybrid that doesn't have, say, as strong standability, these can benefit from slightly lower populations, just in terms of standability. You can get thicker stalks. That's one beautiful thing about canola. It's extremely plastic. One of the challenges for hybrid-specific recommendations is, by the time we get the research done on the hybrid, that would be a hybrid-specific recommendations. We're just about time to phase it out and replace it with another one. So that's just one of the specific challenges that we have for hybrid-specific recommendations.
Okay, great. Brent, got a question. I think this refers to that slide comparison that you had between Liberty 150 to some of the generics on the market. Caitlin has a question about that. She's in Portage la Prairie. The Liberty comparisons to generic glufosinate, were the generics sprayed alone or with the required surfactants?
In all of those trials, they would have been sprayed alone, is how we would have approached that one.
What we got here? Oh, more flea beetle questions. I told you guys this was a big deal. Dan from Carmen Gay, my stomping ground. Flea beetle control with seed treatment. Does the countdown of control start from the day of seeding or emergence?
So I'd say definitely the day from, when you seed, that seed treatment starts to work the day that those plants go in the ground. So the longer that seed is in the ground, the more that seed treatment isn't going to work as well once those plants pop out of the ground. And you'll see, that you might have to spray an insecticide sooner if those plants are staying in the soil, for a long period of time if it is cool conditions that spring.
Okay. Compaction. This is a topic I wish would come up more. This is one I think where we have a lot of misunderstandings. There's some old wives' tales, so to speak. This is one I think in the West we underestimate some of the impacts of compaction. So I'm glad this one came up from Janelle in Saskatchewan. In soils with compaction issues, would you not recommend going deeper for seed or as deep? Not. Okay, hold on. I'm gonna start over. In soils with compaction issues, would you not recommend going as deep for seeding depth? Rob?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And a major concern in compacted soils, particularly in heavy or heavy texture soils that have experienced compaction. It can create additional challenges for getting the crop out of the ground. And that's largely due to loss of soil structure in those compacted soils, loss of porosity, just a bad situation. And it raises an important point. There's general compaction, but then there's compaction associated with the pieces of equipment themselves. I've seen significant challenges with emergence on rigs pulling, say, double anhydrous tanks behind the in tow, where on rubber tires, where you just get extreme compaction from those, and then farmers having controlled traffic, same traffic over and over again with that anhydrous cart. And we've seen advantages there to actually shallowing up under those tracks, because obviously they're getting good seed to soil contact, but it's just so compacted, just creates a real challenge. But we can talk a long time about all the things that compaction lead to in terms of challenges for establishment. Big issue.
It's something like 80% or 85% of compaction happens with that first pass. Like it's, there's a piece of information that we don't all consider. Okay, Tracy, this is the last question. We're gonna wrap up with you. I don't know who it came from, but it's a good one. You talked about Certitude. What is the best tank cleaner after using Certitude? Do you have a recommendation there?
So correct me if I'm wrong, Allison, is it ammonia? I think just water, ammonia. I don't know if people have been having trouble with cleaning out, but that's what I'd suggest.
Allison, any more there?
No, I haven't actually heard a lot of issues with cleaning out of Certitude yet. So yeah.
Okay, good stuff. Whew, awesome. I really appreciate all the panelists. Great information. Lots of great questions from the audience here today. Really do appreciate that as well, and making this as interactive as possible. We'd like to hear what you have to say about today's webinar. We're always looking to improve this process. So if you'd like to take a minute to answer the brief survey, you'll see when you exit the webinar. That would be absolutely awesome. And once again, for those of you who are certified crop advisors, make sure you remember you're eligible for those CCACU education credits for attending this webinar. Those credits are becoming incredibly hard to attain, so this is a great option for you. And make sure you check out canolaschool.com for the latest and greatest in some further agronomic information put on by Real Agriculture and BASF. Thanks again for attending, everybody. On behalf of myself, Sean Haney of Real Agriculture, and everybody at BASF, we want to wish you all the best in the 2023 growing season. Cheers, everybody.